Welcome back to Your Anxiety Toolkit. Today we have the amazing Michelle Massie on. We are talking about OCD core fears. This is a topic I don't talk about a lot. And whenever I know I can find someone who can kill a topic way better than I can, I ask them on. And luckily, this is my dear friend, Michelle. Well, love this human being so freaking much. So I'm so happy to have you here with us, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me on. I always love chatting OCD.
I know. Okay, so Michelle and I were actually on our way to event or a spa or something we were doing together, and we were talking about cases, and we're always, of course, trying to get consultation and make sure that we're addressing cases as best as we can. And Michelle started talking about core fears in a way that I don't talk about it. It's not that I don't talk about it; it's just not in the way in which I do. And I loved the way that you were talking about it, and I wanted everyone to come on and understand why understanding your OCD core fear is so important. So, again, thank you for being here. I'm wondering if you could explain for those who are new to this idea of what do we mean when we talk about core fears in OCD?
Yeah. So I'll actually back up and start with when I was first trained in treating OCD, like maybe like 20 years ago. It was really through the habituation model, right? And so we focused on doing an exposure until a person's anxiety came down halfway at least and kept, you know, essentially habituated to the anxiety. And we really at that time really focused on doing exposures to every single obsession or every single compulsion. But then sometimes it didn't quite generalize. And so I think over the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, there's been more talk about core fears. And I don't know if it really started with the discussion around inhibitory learning or it came before that or after that. I honestly don't know. But it was really the focus of everything about OCD tends to come down to a handful of core fears, right? And so rather than doing exposure, I mean, we can do exposures to every single compulsion that a person has or every single obsession, but a lot of times they have a theme around them. And I don't just mean like the subtypes like harm or contamination, because even within those, there's different core fears. So I have come up with a list of 4 core fears. Other people have 3, other people have 5, whatever. I have 4 that I use with my clients. The first one is something bad is going to happen now. And that means typically I'm going to get sick, sort of not in this second, right? But sort of immediate, within a couple hours or a couple days kind of thing, right? The second one is something is going to happen in the future that's terrible. This is I'm going to get cancer. I'm going to go to hell, something that's sort of far off and, more remote than in the next couple of days or weeks. The third one is the anticipation of I can't handle this feeling. We see it a lot with sensory motor OCD, just right OCD. And that's just this feeling is never going to go away. And I feel paralyzed. I feel like I'm going to go insane. I hear my clients say that a lot. And then the fourth one is I'm going to become abandoned and alone. And we see that a lot, especially with harm OCD subtypes of I've done this terrible thing, or people will think or find out that I've done this terrible thing and nobody will want to be around me. My family will abandon me and I will become, be alone. I'll die destitute, all the things, right? And so I've categorized everything down to those 4 core fears. And it's when we do exposures, we want to make sure that we're really addressing that, because otherwise we're staying really at the surface level of the exposure.
Okay. So let's play it out. Let's give some examples. So let's say somebody, you've talked about harm obsession. So
Mhm.
someone has a subtype of harm OCD and their fear is that they might harm somebody,
Mhm.
right? That's the content of the fear or the obsession. And what you're saying is underneath that fear, it could be that they're afraid, like you said, of dying alone in a jail
Right.
cell. Or maybe for some, it might be that they won't be able to handle the guilt or shame for the rest of their life, and that they would be sort of stuck in purgatory or whatever it might be with this feeling that they don't want to tolerate. And so that's what you're saying is the same subtype might have a different core fear.
And there are 2 things that I think are so important when we're doing exposures. Number 1, to get to the correct core fear, because otherwise we're really just shooting darts all over the place and we may not hit the bullseye. I think the other other major piece is making sure we're getting to somebody's values, right? Is like doing things that align with their values and also move them towards their values. Because again, like, when I was first trained, I've done exposures where I've had clients hold knives to me. And that worked. It was great, fantastic, but it didn't necessarily get to that core fear. And so I don't know if it really hit the, nail on the head with every single one of those clients. And so we want to make sure that then when they walk away from treatment, we've actually addressed the common denominator. And I think where we see this so often, right, is contamination, because there's three types of contamination fears, right? Is this, I'm going to get sick or die. I'm going to cause harm, get somebody else sick or kill them, and disgust.
Yes.
And so that's a perfect example of like, if we don't understand what the purpose is or like what the fear is behind their obsessions, I could be doing exposure that's addressing disgust and it's really a fear of harm, or vice versa.
Right. Which you've just led into the next question, which is, how does identifying the core fear help with treatment planning for folks with OCD? So you've kind of shared that, but maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, it's mainly just trying to figure out which exposures would make the most sense, right? And again, if we're hitting the core fear, then we may not need to break down the exposures as, into the very specific pieces, right? So, like, let's say I had a client years ago who had like severe contamination. Everything was contaminated, right? Like, to the point where they were like eating potato chips with either a fork or chopsticks, right? Like they couldn't touch anything. They were using sandals in their own shower, etc., right? And this is really before I was addressing core fears and knew about inhibitory learning. And so if I were to approach it now, I would think about like the bigger issue. If I stood back and asked them, what is your core fear? What are you most afraid of? And I actually don't know what that client would say at this point because it's been so many years. But being able to plan out the correct exposure, then I don't necessarily need to do every single little thing, right? I had them eating potato chips with their hands, going into their shower and doing all sorts of things within their shower. But there might have been more like grouping of their exposures where we're hitting that core fear and then we're seeing more of a drop or a bigger learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes kind of across diagnoses too, right? So let's say if someone's avoiding food, identifying a core fear might also help us in the assessment
Yeah.
process of, oh, is this an eating disorder? Is it ARFID? Is it a disgust, thing? Is it a health anxiety thing on why they're avoiding this food item?
Yeah.
And so I think that is a really interesting piece in terms of, understanding what's underneath the actual fear.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to maybe, if we could clarify, is a lot of folks who aren't trained in the correct science-based treatment for OCD often will be spending a lot of time with folks on OCD of like, what's the underlying trauma, or where did this come from, or what's the underlying deep dark. And can you help us differentiate the difference between identifying a core fear and just doing a whole bunch of therapy, digging at stuff that's not necessary?
Yeah. So honestly, when I'm doing this core fear thing with clients, I just label my 4 core fears and I ask them, and we usually will ask clients like, okay, what would happen if you didn't do your compulsion? What would happen if you didn't check the door lock? Or what would happen if you didn't hand wash? Or what would happen if you changed your baby's diaper and nobody else was around? Right? What are you most afraid of if you didn't do that compulsion? And that's how I get to that core fear, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to like with, if we think it's trauma based, is like, tell me about your childhood or tell me
Yeah.
about when this first started, right?
Yeah.
Which is, if we look at, ERP is a CBT model, right? And it's really sticking with right now, you're not functional. What is going on that will help you become more functional? And I think, like, if there truly is a trauma piece to the OCD, right, which for some of our patients there are, not all my patients have OCD, have trauma, but some do, right? I think having addressing the trauma is important, and I think also for some people they're interested to know and go down that route, right? But we don't necessarily need to do that all the time in order to treat the OCD, and not
Yep.
everybody with OCD has trauma.
Yep. Agreed. The reason I love asking clients about their core fear is often, this is particularly for those folks who have whack-a-mole obsessions, is,
Yes.
one obsession shows up and it feels all real and true, and they start to do compulsions and they're doing a lot and they're spending a lot of time focusing or avoiding this obsession. And then let's say they work on that and then their OCD just comes in a different form, right? Like let's say it's jumped from religious OCD to relationship OCD, or it's jumped from contamination to existential or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes when that's happening, it's hard in the moment because it feels so real to catch that it's a very similar cycle of OCD. But often we can find that the core fear is the same. It's
Right.
just changing content, it's
Right.
changing subtype. Do you use it in that way as
Mhm.
well?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's often this underlying theme, right? And
Yeah.
we can even figure that out. People are always asking, especially newer clinicians, is how do you build your exposure list or your hierarchy? And we often will group by subtype, but then we can kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, these are actually all the same core fear. So
Mhm.
what are we getting at in terms of the core fear?
Yeah.
Right. And I think too, as we've changed over the years from the exposures that I was taught to do, right? The ones that are not very justice based or justice
Mm.
informed, right?
Yep.
Is that I think also addressing the core fear, right? If you have this fear of like related to sexual orientation OCD or harm OCD or something like that, rather than going through these visuals, and people can still do this, there's nothing wrong with it if they want to go through these imaginal exposures of harming somebody or doing something bad, right? But we can also look at like a more values based exposure that
Yep.
addresses their core fear, right? Because if the fear is like, I'm this terrible person who could cause harm to these people. And then if people knew I would be abandoned and alone, then it's like, okay, let's address that as opposed to you going around and doing all these naughty things,
Yep.
right? Because those also might not align with your values.
Yes. Yes. So let's talk about that. And this is particularly for folks who've taken the any of my ERP or OCD courses, because I really want to be speaking to those folks because they're going through this and they're doing it on their own. They're not got a therapist who's
Right.
able. It's sometimes easier when you've got a therapist across from you to identify this stuff,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Is often what will happen in these exposures is looking at your fear and you're going, okay, here are all the exposures I could potentially do. And you're really saying, like, some of them aren't actually addressing this underlying fear.
Right.
Let's say somebody has the fear that I'll be alone. In that case, what exposures might they be doing? That because they might be on their own thinking, oh, the exposure is just to be alone. But they're like, I don't mind being alone. I'm an introvert. I'm fine. It's just I don't want to die alone.
Right.
My fear is like this thing that I can't create. What type of exposures would you recommend as a clinician to your clients in that circumstance?
So honestly, I would probably first start out with a little bit of like belief system work, right?
Mhm.
Is like this, do we have evidence that you'll be alone? And have we
Mhm.
seen your people around you abandon you in real time, like for like things that you deem mistake worthy or like, and have you seen them abandon other people, right?
Mm. Mm.
You can do exposures to what that looks like ending up alone, right? And I think even sometimes, when we have these like narratives that fester in our head, they feel so real. But I've also had clients just say out loud the storyline, like, I would be accused of doing this terrible thing. I would end up in jail and my family would never come visit me. And sometimes just even saying that out loud, like they can sort of laugh at themselves. I'm sure
Yeah.
your patients have done the same
Yeah.
thing, right? And it's like this, like, that's not even realistic. Like, in what world would I actually be, arrested for that? And this isn't reassurance. This is more like making sense of the language that we're saying, right?
Rational
Then, right,
thinking.
right, right. Exactly. You can also do like more exposures around like word search games or, like I love to do like Mad Lib stuff,
Yep.
changing out language. And so it's like, or even like reading stories about people who have been convicted of and are abandoned, right? Those are one ways that you can do that.
Right. And for those listening, you might want to go back and listen. Recently, we did an episode with Kimberly Leonti on ways to make exposures fun, especially those imaginals and scripts and Mad Libs
Yeah.
and games. So that is definitely a resource to connect you to. What about the folks who have the thought, that core fear, I can't handle this?
Yeah.
And this goes back to like, and maybe they have no evidence that they can handle it. So what
Yeah.
would be an exposure you might encourage in that scenario?
So I even like things as simple as like putting a penny in your shoe, right? And walking around, or
Mm,
putting your shoes on the wrong feet, writing wrong. And I know, clients will say, but that doesn't, like, I'm not worried something bad will happen. But it's really just noticing, like, can I handle discomfort, right? Can
yes.
I be mindful of this discomfort? And like, I think I can't handle it. The other thing is to
Mhm,
do the thing that they think they can't handle, right?
mhm.
And using language around inhibitory learning is asking themselves, like, how long do I think I can handle this for, right? Then put up a timer and see what happens in that point, right? I had a client, we did a bathroom exposure a couple weeks ago. At the beginning of session, they did the bathroom exposure, and then we were talking about like the week's stuff that we had to talk about, and within 5 minutes they're like, I'm not even thinking about that. And when they first got done with the bathroom exposure, they were like sweating bullets, right? It was like
Yeah.
this, and like, OCD hands, as we call them, and all the things. And within 5 minutes, we were talking about things, and that we weren't using it as a distraction, but we were really focused on like living a value based life, right? And so
Yeah.
it was, we kept checking in with it, but it was like, yeah, I was so worried that after touching things in the bathroom, not even the toilet, just things in the bathroom, right? The faucet, etc., that I wouldn't even be able to concentrate on a conversation. And here
Yeah.
he was having a full on conversation with me, and clearly it was a non issue, right? So
Right.
it's like being able to just prove to ourselves that.
Mhm. So I think that the main thing for students who are listening is you would still work through the same exposures. It doesn't change the fact that you could rely on imaginals, interoceptives, doing the things you've been avoiding, using response prevention. Like the whole strategy stays the same. And please, Michelle, correct
Yeah,
me if this is not exactly your wording, but identifying the core fear can help with really doubling down on making sure your exposure hits the spot and you're getting the best bang for your buck,
yeah, yeah,
ultimately. And
exactly.
also helps you to see the overlap of these subtypes and how the content is different, but yet the core fear is the same. Is there
Yes.
anything that I haven't listed there that is important for them to know about the application of exposures in that case?
I don't think so, because it's really, you're doing the exact same things. Like, we're not changing what I don't have a new term or way of doing
Mm.
exposure. We're still doing exposure, right? It's just more informed, right?
Yep.
It's like making sure we're addressing all the things again. And the contamination example is the best example, right? Because if I'm doing, I'm going around and touching things, and they're not afraid of disgust, right? Then like I may not be hitting the nail on the head. And so
Yep.
it's like now we've just wasted a bunch of precious time and resources doing something that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I know as a supervisor of my staff, we're on this really beautiful text chain of wonderful therapists, and they will often text me questions. I'm sure you have your own private practice. It's the same thing. And I've actually seen this play out in like our other groups of supervision and consultation online. Is a therapist will say, what's a really good exposure for blank obsession, like relationship obsessions, right? Or what's a really good exposure? What are some great exposures for, let's say, you said sexual orientation OCD? Back in the day, I think we would have been like, oh, I remember when I
My
was being
list.
trained,
Yeah.
it's like, you'd be like, oh, you need to wear, if you're a male and you had sexual orientation, here are the ones that you do. Like, there's just like
Right.
this list that you do. Whereas
100%.
now, instead of it being just this cookie cutter treatment, the first question is like, well, wait, what's the core fear? Then we can assign the exposure. And I think
Yeah.
that's where ERP has become more personalized, more, like you said, justice based,
Yeah.
a little more a gentler approach, or even more an effective approach. Do you have any thoughts on that
Yeah.
personally as a supervisor? You're in a
Yeah.
consultant as well.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because you're right. Is like I monitor this Facebook group, and like this question gets asked at least once a day. Is like, what exposure do you, and it's like, it's not a one size fits all, right? And
Yeah.
there's a fantastic exposure workbook that people, love to pull out, but it really like, and I know even newer therapists will say, ooh, what do you have in your exposure toolbox, like in your office? I was just cleaning out my office because I had dumped things during COVID and was like redoing everything in the office. And I threw away a bunch of stuff because I literally have a handful of things in there, right? Like I have some
Yeah.
Cetaphil, I have some shaving cream, I have some bubbles. Literally, they've never been used. Like
Yeah.
I just throw them away because it's like, every single client, I don't use the same thing. I mean, I have a lot of the same exposures I'll do, but I'll have clients bring in things from home, or I'll
Yeah.
have like, it's such a personalized thing that I don't have like this giant basket of exposures, like, yes, at UCLA we had a giant, box of knives. I don't tend to keep knives in the office. That just doesn't seem safe, but it's like, for every single client it's something different, and so
Mhm.
it's like, I really don't utilize a whole lot of stuff. Not to say that we can't have tools, but I think there's just this no one size fits all. They
Yeah.
always say, if you've met a person with OCD, you've met a person with OCD.
Mhm.
And so, I definitely, I think the difference between somebody who's just starting treatment, a clinician who's just starting to work with OCD, and someone who has it, is like, we have these like, oh, I've seen this, I know what questions to ask, or like starting exposures, but it's not this cookie cutter thing. So
Right. Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. So when you mentioned some people have 3 or some people have 5, do we need to know what those other ones are?
So I always laugh. I always start this out with saying, Alec Pollard and I go head to head, right? And if you don't know Alec Pollard, he's amazing. I love him. But so he has 3, and he combines 2 of the ones that I don't ever remember because I teach
Right.
my own. But he just combines 2 of the ones, and I think it's I actually don't know. I don't remember which ones he
Mhm.
combines. But it's really the same protocol.
It's the
It's just
same.
more like, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I just threw out, maybe some people have 5. I don't know. That was just a
Yeah.
random number.
No,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure because I know a
Yeah.
lot of clinicians will be listening and they're gonna be emailing me saying, "What's the
Okay.
the 4th one? What's the third? What's the
Yeah.
difference one?" So,
Yeah.
okay, good.
No, Alec and I, we joke about this every time we teach together, and it's he just combines 2 of the ones that I separate out, and so it's just a different way of looking at it, but essentially we say the
Amazing.
same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Okay, this has really hit the nail on the head. Thank you so much. I feel like it's exactly what people needed to hear. I think that it will help a lot of people in understanding what that core fear is. And number 2 is understanding it in the application of picking helpful exposures. Now, last question. Some people become quite obsessive about picking the right exposures, right? And that it becomes very scary that what if I do the wrong exposure? What if I'm not doing treatment right? Is there any feedback you might give those folks who get stuck having anxiety that they haven't picked the right core fear or that they're doing the wrong exposure? What's your genius idea of
I
that?
I'd say, what's your core fear of that, right? Was
Yeah.
the I can't handle it. It's the I can't handle the feeling that I picked the wrong thing, right? And we
Yeah.
see this so often, right? What if you're not the right therapist for me? What if I haven't told you all the information? And so we're not hitting, what if I really don't have OCD and I'm just making this up, right? But again, there's another core fear there, is like, I'm either wasting resources and you're going to be disappointed in me and you're going to abandon me, or I won't be able to handle the feeling, or,
There you go.
so
So there's
yeah.
even the fear that you got your core fear wrong has a core
Mhm.
fear.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
like a cycle, we just get stuck in over there, and I think at the end of the day, for those who would
Yeah.
get you like, "Please do this imperfectly," would be my
Mhm.
main message. Please let your exposures be a B minus effort. If you are trying to do an A plus effort all the time, it will come back to bite you. You will
Yeah.
become a compulsion, so we wanna keep an eye on that as well. Oh, Michelle, you're so amazing. Can you
Thank you.
tell us where
Yeah.
people can learn about you,
Yeah.
get in touch with you, hear about your practice?
Yeah. Best place is our website, which is anxietytherapyla.com. I post infrequently on Instagram. Yesterday, I did a whole dump on a bunch of books because I was like, I need to have these all in one place. But I tend to post during like OCD Awareness Week and the conference. And then I'm like, I don't have the energy for this or the capacity for this. Lots of self compassion around that for me. And best place to get a hold of me is our website.
Amazing. And we'll
Yeah.
have all of that in the show notes as well if people
Yeah.
want to get in touch with Michelle. Thank you, my love, for being here. It's
Thank
really,
you for
really,
having
I'm
me.
grateful. I don't, I mean, while yes, I could have done it, I just feel like you did a better job, and I love it. You killed it, like I said you would. Thank you so
I
much for
love
being
talking
here.
about OCD. So it's like, get me started and I go.
All right, we should just keep recording one after the other. I could batch a couple extra episodes.
Right? I just
Amazing.
have to change outfits in between.
Yep. Oh no,
It's
no.
like Jeopardy.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, everybody, thank you for being here. Please do follow along, and we're so excited to have you be part of this community.